Welcome to From Barriers to Breakthroughs, the podcast that helps you create the life, business, and love you truly want. Not with silver bullets or magical pills, but by removing what's actually holding you back. Here's what nobody tells you about getting unstuck. It has nothing to do with what you know, but it has everything to do with that switch within that allows you to turn that knowledge into action. We'll explore powerful stories, breakthrough research, and game-changing strategies so you can finally break through and thrive. Your breakthrough begins now. When it comes to my story, I go back in time quite far, back to when I was 8 years old. Why 8, you might ask? Well, until I was 8 years old, I had a fairly what one could consider normal suburban Canadian little kids upbringing. We had family gatherings, Christmas, movies, Easter, all that kind of stuff. But when I was 8 years old, my parents joined a cult. Now, a cult is not something like other religions where there is openness and fellowship. And while they purport to have all those things, they add a lot more isolation, judgment, and fear because they want to keep you away from everybody else. And so while it sort of had all of the underpinnings of what should have been loving kindness and friendship, what actually happened was I developed an incredible fear of always being judged, always being watched, always worrying that I was going to make a mistake. And it was an absolutely terrifying way of growing up. And so because I was afraid to leave, and they terrify you about what happens to those who do leave, and they get very graphic when I would talk about it. So I stayed in it. My sisters left it. My parents, my brother, and we all stayed in. I got married to someone who was a part of it. I had children, and that's where stuff really started to go off the rails. After I had my first son, I went back to work. Well, that wasn't really what you're supposed to do. I mean, they'd kind of gone, all right, fine, you can go to university, but soon after that, okay, fine, work for a little bit, but then you have to stay home and raise the children and, I don't know, make muffins and tomato sauce from scratch. I don't know. But that was the expectation, that there was an end date to my own personal independence. But my ex, we'll get to that in a minute, couldn't make enough money for us to just live off of one income. So after my son was born, I went back to work. And that was a big no-no. So I was already skirting the edges of what was acceptable as part of the church. When I had my second son and I went back, I was truly ostracized. So I had no connection in the church. I was terrified of making connections out of it because all of those people would lead you to a horrible place. And so I became very, very small, very gray, very quiet, and very, very angry. To the point that when I was 32 years old, I really did want to leave. What they were teaching never made sense anymore, and it wasn't what I thought it should be, but to leave it all behind, I would be left with literally nothing. I didn't know how to go to the movies. We didn't have a television, so I didn't know how to get cable. I'd never cut my hair. I'd never worn makeup. I'd never had a drink. Think of something fun. I'd probably never done it. No prom, no parties, no sleepovers, and a very limited group of friends at school. No sports. I had to play the flute because apparently that's what girls played. I really wanted to play the saxophone. Should probably pick that up someday. But this is how it was. So at 32, I started to act crazy erratic, driving like a maniac. I got 9 speeding tickets in 12 months. I would go jogging at 2 o'clock in the morning in the scariest places I could think of just to will the universe to just take me out. But it never happened until it almost did. March 17, 2008. I was late for meeting at 6:30 in the morning. It was dark. I live in Canada. So in Canada in March, it's very cold. And as I rocketed down this road, it was a 4-lane road and it's 60 kilometers an hour. Well, I was going about 110. And I go firing along and I didn't care. And I was berating myself because I was late. I was stupid. How could I? I'll never get my act together, and so on and so on. And the more mad I got at myself, the harder I pushed on that gas pedal. Well, I went to enter the highway, probably slowed down to maybe 80. And I realized too late that this particular on-ramp that I'd taken a zillion times was a little bit tighter than I had remembered. And so as I pulled my steering wheel, I started to slide. And I've been driving like a crazy maniac for a long time, so I just took hands off the wheel, foot off the gas. Okay, I'm going to right myself. Except I didn't this time. This time, my back end hit the gravel, spun me around, and sent me sailing over the edge. I went into an arc, and halfway through that, I don't know if you've ever been in a car that's caught air. That's very, very quiet. And as I arced through the air, facing the wrong way in the pitch black of that morning, I knew I was in trouble. When I hit, my tires exploded and I was careened onto the roof of my car and crushed against my steering wheel. Of course, all the windows exploded and there was gas and dirt and rocks flying all over as I spun like a top on the roof of my car. And then when it stopped, my first thought was, I'm not dead, which is usually what most people think when they've had a near-death experience like that. But mine was more important because they tell you in this church, in this cult that I joined. Remember, it's not like the normal churches where we're welcoming and wholesome and beautiful. This is a scary place of people with very small minds. And in order to stay together, these small lines compound and they have to make you afraid. And the two stories they told you when you thought about leaving was that there's ways you were going to die. One was cancer. They're very graphic about that. And the other one was a car crash. And I just crashed my car. I'm hanging upside down and thinking that they were wrong. They were wrong about me necessarily dying. I didn't, clearly. And if they're wrong about this, what else were they wrong about? And then I thought I should probably get out of my car. So I hop out of the new sunroof, which is formerly known as my passenger door, shake the glass from my hair. My only injury was mild whiplash. And as I stared at the crushed car and avoided eye contact with everyone else on the highway whose day I had completely ruined, I really started to think that I got to get out of here no matter how hard it was and no matter how scary, because I didn't know how the world worked. I had to do that. This was my wake-up call. So that was March. By August, I had left the group by telling my two young sons, who were 3 and 5 at the time, and my now ex, that there was more than one way to talk to God, and I was going to go find a new way, one that was healthier for me. By October, we were separated. We were just not made for this new transition for sure. And we're making each other happy. And so that we were separated by October, divorced by December. And then I got fired right before Christmas because I worked for people who were part of this cult. And they obviously didn't side with me, but I thought it was particularly interesting that they chose that time to let me go. I begged them to keep me till January so I could at least try to find something else. And on January the 12th, I left. And I had nothing. I had no job. I had no home. I had found something to rent that I could put a roof over my head for now. And I went about trying to rebuild my life. So that was all the way back in end of 2008, 2009. And now we're going to fast track. I did learn how the world worked in a very messy, messy way. But I remarried. I have an amazing, what I call upgrade husband. I now have 2 stepkids in addition to my 2 children. And I built a social media agency because I was also at this point extremely unemployable because not only was I fired from that last job, that was the second time I got fired. And then within a year, I'd found another job and then I got fired from that one. So we're going into 2010 and I needed to find something to survive and feed my children. And social media was new. And I figured, well, I don't know how to do anything else, so I guess I'll teach myself this. Well, thankfully, it was a blue ocean, not a lot of competitors. And all I had to know was more than anybody else, which at that time was very little. So I built up a coaching practice, which turned into a successful agency, made $1 million a year, 14 people on my team. And I should have been happy. I had a beautiful husband, a beautiful home, a great car, a great life, travel. And yet I felt as miserable as I was hanging upside down in that car. And I couldn't figure out why. And so I went thinking about getting rid of my agency. I wasn't enjoying it anymore. By 2019, it was a red ocean. Competitors everywhere, everyone undercutting everybody else, and everybody was a social media expert. And I decided that I wasn't really solving any problems in a big way for my clients by creating amazing Facebook ads. And I wanted to do something that was deeper, that provided more for the people that I was working with so they could really break through some of the barriers that I saw while I was working with them simply on the marketing side. Unfortunately, I had built a social media agency entirely upon myself. It depended on me to create the strategies, to create the ads, to work everything. And so when I went to sell it, sure, I found a buyer until lo and behold, this one fateful day when they asked me, well, what about your business is proprietary? What about your business is not dependent on you? And I had to say, nothing. And so I kissed $800,000 goodbye because I built a business that depended on me. And when I look back now, I realized that I had grown up in a way where I felt like I didn't matter, where nobody wanted to choose me. And so when I built my business and made it dependent on me, it filled that hole. But you see, I haven't figured that out yet. And so when I sold, well, actually just gave my agency away to my competitor, I'm like, here, just have at it. I don't want to do this anymore. It's all yours. And I went on to create a high performance coaching practice, one on one work with people that were striving to break out from where they were at. And oh, I just loved it. And I worked on that and grew it and got incredible results for my clients, whether they needed more money or more time, a better lifestyle, better communication with their spouses and people in their lives. The results were absolutely incredible. But I had a feeling that there was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it until one day sitting at my desk, I looked up and I'm like, where am I going with all this? What do I want to do when I want to say retire, when I want to maybe sell this business? And as I said those three words, sell this business in my head, I realized that once again, I had built a business dependent on me. And so I realized that something, if I was going to really grow as a person and by default, be able to actually build a business I could scale and then sell, it would have to not be dependent on me. But what did that look like? And over the years since, I have been able to redevelop my business into something that's fully scalable, flexible, and it doesn't lose me. Because what always scared me about my businesses was like I was going to lose the me part. Because when you grow up being told that you're nothing, like really you're nothing, and you must think of yourself constantly as nothing. Anytime you succeed, that's bad. It really gets into your DNA. It takes a long time to process its way out. But I can happily and successfully say that I did work through those feelings of abandonment, of feeling small, of feeling like I didn't matter, and I came out on the other side with a business that is thriving, that I can see the future for. And I can see that future because it is no longer pandering to my ego and my fears. Because the ego and the fears and the frustrations that I had, those were all barriers to the growth that I really wanted. But now the only thing that stops me is me. There's a quote I heard from someone named Tony, and I'm going to blank on his last name. But he said, your identity is either your prison or your passport. And that's really how a great way of describing how I've grown in the last couple of years, most recently, but I've been inching toward this all the way along. That I don't want to be stuck in a prison. I want to fly. But the only thing that stops me from flying is me. And when I talk to my clients and I ask them, like, what do you think the number one reason that you're not where you want to be? Like, what is it? 2-letter word, me. And once we can discover what part of me is actually in the way, that's how we go from prison to passport. And that's what I want to do for the rest of my life in this wonderful company that I have created that I can now be truly proud of. And that we can continue to grow as an individual so I can be an example for my children, so I can bring my clients out of whatever darkness that they're in into whatever it is that they want. Again, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's better relationships, or all of the above. All of these things are possible. But we have to learn what it is about ourselves that actually gets into our way. And I'll wrap this up with just sort of a thing, and you'll hear this in the next podcast. I'll talk about it in greater detail. What I did in the last year and a half was I captured step by agonizing step, and it took me a long time to figure this out. What exactly did I do to go from behind a barrier of my own making. Most of the barriers we make, like 99% of our barriers, are self-inflicted. So how did I, for the barriers I could remove, actually break them down one at a time so that all of my natural talents and energy and ideas and desires and ambitions could naturally flow and create an enduring and consistent process whereby no matter what, no matter how hard the day is, I never flag and I never falter. So I'll hear more about that in the next episode. But now you know a little bit about me. I hope to learn a little bit more about you. And there you have it. Another step closer to removing what's been blocking your path. Remember, you already have everything you need inside you. Sometimes it just takes finding that one domino that's been holding back the rest. If today's episode helped you identify even one barrier you're ready to remove, then we're making some serious progress. To keep the breakthroughs coming, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, and visit rebeccamountain.ca for additional resources to help you bridge that gap between knowing and doing. This is Rebecca, and you've been listening to For Barriers to Breakthroughs.